Hey everybody, and welcome back to the channel. Today you're checking out a Magicka Warden PvP build. This is updated for the Wrathstone DLC, and this is just a super easy build to put together whether you're a new player, you're new to PvP and you want to try it out, or you're experienced, doesn't matter. The sets I've chosen here are pretty easy to get, and the build is actually really strong in PvP. So let's check out the stats, the gear, the skills that you need to use, champion points, and everything else coming up next. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the stats here on the build. Let me buff up a few things. Magicka Warden has a lot of buffs. Did I get them all? I think I did. Usual disclaimer on my builds is you can always increase the stats with things like gold gear, gold glyphs, Undaunted maxed out, for example. All those things will give you better stats overall, but this just gives you kind of a baseline of where you can start the build at. Now, we've got 38k max Magicka, about 22k health. That'll be about 25, 26k in PvP. 14.5k stamina. Our Magicka recovery actually does go up with our glyph here, so about 1800 Magicka recovery, and that doesn't take into account the betting net, which is like another 400, so your Magicka recovery is very good. Stamina recovery is also pretty good. For our spell damage, let me make sure that's buffed. Buff spell damage is about 2500, and we do have a Berserker glyph, so you're sitting at about 3k spell damage. Once you're fully buffed there, 36% spell critical. And for our resistances here, with our armor buff active, about 23,000 spell and physical resistance and 2300 crit resistance. So I have put all my points into max Magicka. I am a stage 4 vampire. You don't need to be a vampire for this build, but I do like the extra Magicka and stamina recovery, so it's always something to consider. Mundustone is the Atronach, just giving us a little bit extra boost there to Magicka recovery overall. For food, we've got the purple tri-stat food, gives us a really nice bonus for health, Magicka, stamina. It's awesome. Definitely use that. For the potions here, I mentioned tri-stat potions are going to be your best in slot for this Magicka Warden build. But we also have our crit bonus on the front bar, and we have spell power on the back bar. So you can actually use just the plain old Magicka potions if you want to save a little bit of money. Definitely recommend that, especially if you're just learning the build and you don't want to waste tripods. Just use basic magic potions. It's pretty good still. Let's talk about race. I'm an Argonian. I've been an Argonian on my Magicka Warden for pretty much forever. It's a good overall race, I think, especially for beginners. You got OP swimming speed, of course. 50% there is pretty nice, actually. Healing done by 6%, pretty good. Max health is good. Disease resistance, good. Max Magicka, also good. But then what's really nice is the potion passive. So you get 4,000 health, Magicka, and stamina every time you use a potion. So if you think about that, plus your tri-stat potion, that is just tons of stats that roll in every 45 seconds. So it's actually really nice for PvP. Now, I will say some other races are very good, like the Breton, for example, is going to be awesome. This build is a heavy armor setup, and so that extra cost reduction that Bretons get for this build is going to be amazing. Also, High Elf is always good for a Magicka-based race. Dark Elf as well would be nice for the extra stamina. So basically, any of those four can't go wrong. All right, so I think that covers the basics. Let's go ahead and jump into the gear next. Starting with our first 5-piece set, I went with spinners, just a really common set, easy to get. Really strong in PvP, though. It's an awesome set. You get 2 max Magicka bonuses, which is nice. Spell damage, also great. And then on the 5-piece here, we get an extra 3k plus spell penetration. So I mentioned this is a heavy armor setup that I'm using, just for that increased tankiness and survivability. So pairing spinners with a heavy armor build is really nice in my opinion. You get the damage, that you would be missing from not running light armor, but you also get all the great heavy armor passive. So I really like spinners for this particular setup. So I am using spinners, weapons, and jewelry to make this work. Front bar, we've got the lightning staff. Now, lightning staff is going to be optimal for most Magicka Warden builds because lightning staff actually does buff your AoE attacks. So let's take a look at that really quickly. So under Ancient Knowledge, this passive gives you 8% damage done with your area effect abilities. So that's going to be our shock, which is our main AoE spammable, and then our ultimate as well is going to get buffed very nicely from running a lightning staff. Now I do like Nerdhoned here as the trait. It's going to give you about 200 or more extra spell damage on your build. You will have to trait change that though because Spinners does not come in Nerdhoned, but I think it's definitely worth it. I am using that Berserker enchant, which I mentioned, giving us 350, actually a little bit more like 400 spell damage every 5 seconds when that procs. Now it does have a cooldown because we're not using infused, but I find that when I switch to my front bar, that 5 seconds is just perfect as far as burst potential. So I do like running that in that spot. For the back bar, I'm using the Spinner's Ice Staff infused trait here. And you can mix up what enchant you want to run on your Ice Staff. There's a lot of good things you can do here. So for me, again, since I'm using heavy armor, I'm really going to get a lot of benefit from an Absorb Magicka enchant on the back bar infused. That gives you 425 Magicka, and this will be every 2 seconds. Every 2 seconds, so effectively another 400 Magicka recovery on your build when you have this active, and you should have this up most of the time because of your back bar AoEs, which we'll go over in a minute. But yes, very strong there to run Absorb Magic infused back bar enchant. Now you can also put your Berserker enchant here. You'll have a higher uptime on that spell damage. And then the third option here would be if you want to play a really control-focused build, you could run a Frost enchant here, and that's going to give you more chances to proc Immobilize, basically rooting your enemies. It also does really nice damage too on a Magicka Warden. So those would be kind of my 3 top picks. Right now I'm just running the Absorb Magicka enchant though. All right, so we've got our 2 staves, and then running jewelry here like I mentioned. Necklace and 2 rings, all arcane here. I have 2 Magicka recovery and 1 spell damage for those. All right, moving on from spinners, our next 5-piece set is going to be Julianos. And this is a crafted set. I believe it's 6 traits. You can craft this from the Orsinium DLC, or it's pretty common on guild traders as well. So let's go over the stats. You get spell critical, max Magicka, another spell critical, and then about 300 spell damage. So for a heavy armor Magicka setup, this particular set is actually really good because, again, it's making up some of those deficits that you have by running heavy armor, specifically adding a lot of spell critical, which is really going to help balance the build out. I like the spell crit on this set, and then the spell damage is really nice as well as the extra max Magicka. The fact that you can craft this in any weight and any trait just makes it really easy to put on your Magicka Warden. So I definitely recommend this set, especially if you're new to the game. It's going to really limit the amount of farming that you have to do, and it just makes it quick and easy to put together a really strong Magicka Warden build. Overall, when I was thinking about how to set this up, I realized that I had a lot of different damage types, so I didn't want to go full-on Frost Ice Warden. It didn't really make sense. Yes, I'm using Frost on my ultimate, but I'm also using Force Pulse, which uses all 3 damage types. I'm also using a lot of lightning heavy attacks, which is going to be shock damage. So rather than speccing into one specific damage type, to me, just getting something with a lot of spell damage is going to buff all of my damage types across the board. It's also going to buff my healing. So I think this is just a win-win for this kind of setup. So I am using this 5 body pieces here. You want to maximize your resistances. So that's going to be heavy chest first. Reinforced trait is also good for maximizing resistances. And then heavy legs second. Those should be always your primary heavy armor pieces because they have the most resistances. Feet as well also have a lot of resistance, so you generally want that to be your heavy armor piece. And then for your hands and waist, you want these generally to be light. Okay, and that also means that we're going to run heavy head and shoulders. So just keep that in mind. If we don't have a heavy head and shoulders, you can run heavy waist and hands here to make sure you have those 5 pieces of heavy armor. But ideally, you would have 2 pieces of light Julianos here. Grab as much impen trait as possible. A couple of well-fitted, like I said, or maybe 1 reinforced chest will be really good. Max Magicka on everything is fine, honestly, because we're running that purple tri-stat food. So our stamina should be fine as far as that. Close to 15k stamina, you don't need to run tri-stat enchants. Last but not least, let's talk about the monster set. And I feel like on a Magicka Warden, you can run lots of different monster sets. So this can kind of be up to you and how you prefer to make your build. I'm going to recommend two or three actually. So first, I think Magicka Warden lacks a really strong burst heal. Magicka Warden kind of plays like a Magicka Templar, where they're really tanky and you can absorb a lot of damage and you have all these great buffs and stuff. But the one thing that they lack that a Magicka Templar has is you don't have Breath of Life. You have Healing Spores, but Healing Spores is more of an AoE heal. It's not a burst heal. So if you're having trouble staying alive on Magicka Warden, my first recommendation is slot a healing monster set. Now there's a couple options for that. Right now I am using Earth Gore. This gives you a really strong heal over 6 seconds. Now, right now, this is pretty overpowered still, especially in Battlegrounds. It is going to be reduced in the next chapter. I believe it's going down to single target for that heal. But if you're fighting, trying to stay alive by yourself, generally that heal is going to go to you. So it's not going to be a problem, I don't think. If you don't like the Earth Gore set, you can run any of the other healing sets. For Monster Helm, one that I really like also is Chokethorn. Chokethorn gives you a really strong heal as well over 4 seconds, and a faster cooldown also, but it does have a 15% chance, so it's not going to be as clutch. It's not going to proc exactly when you want it, but it's still really good at keeping you alive. It also has that that Magicka recovery bonus on the one piece. So run a healing set again if you're having trouble staying alive in PvP. Earth Gore, Chokethorn, whatever you can run there. If you are really confident, though, and you don't have any trouble staying alive, or maybe you're playing with a healer in your group, then run something else. And what I recommend for that is going to be this set called Celestrix. And I love running Celestrix on Magicka Warden, you guys. Another thing that Magicka Warden lacks is a really good stun. I mean, there's that weird heal/stun, but not a lot of people like that. So this set procs an Earthquake, which is an AoE stun. It does physical damage, which is fine because you're really just using it for the stun effect. It has a really quick cooldown too, 5.5 seconds. And what happens is it procs off any damage dealt, any damage. And we have lots of damage sources, you guys. We have 2 AoE ground effects that are going to be ticking, basically every second is a chance to proc Celestrix. So you're going to have this up almost every 5 seconds, that AoE stun that really just goes well with the Magicka Warden AoE kind of style of build. So yep, if you're not worried about staying alive so much, definitely think about Celestrix. It gives you a nice stun that just really catches people off guard and lets you just mow them down with your AoEs. So I really like that one too. I think that covers the gear. So yes, just make sure you're running 5 pieces of heavy. So ideally you would have head, chest, shoulders, legs and feet. That's going to give you the most resistance as possible. And then 2 light. That's going to be waist and hands. But again, there's other ways you can run that if you need to, depending on your monster set. All right, let's jump into the skills next. Starting with our front bar, which is our lightning staff bar. We've got Bird of Prey. This comes from the Animal Companion skill line. It's the last skill that you get here. And it does a couple things for you. So it's basically a buff. Gives you 4 seconds of Major Expedition, Major Endurance as well. I think that's going away next patch. But what we're really using it for here is while slotted, you gain Minor Berserk, increasing your damage done by 8%. So basically, anytime you are on your front bar, you're getting that 8% flat damage. It's really going to help you burst targets down and just have more damage overall, since we are a heavy armor build and we're not spec'd specifically for damage. So this is a great skill. The Major Expedition is actually really good for closing the gap into other groups and things like that. So I do use it for Major Expedition sometimes as well, but mostly for the Minor Berserk, like I said. So next up, we've got Deep Fissure, and this is your bread and butter DPS skill as a Magicka Warden. Gives you really nice Magicka damage up front in a line straight out from you. It has about a 3-second timer though, so you'll cast that, see the animation, and then it goes off in a line. So just be aware of that. Make sure you are aiming so you get the most out of that. This is going to be the second skill that we get from Animal Companions. And what's really good about this as well, not just the AoE damage, which is strong, is you also get Major Breach, reducing enemy spell resistance by 50 to 80 for 5 seconds. Now that 5 seconds sounds like a pretty short debuff, but you will be using this every 3 to 4 seconds, like I said, because of that cast time and just to optimize your DPS. So make sure you keep that window in mind, at least every 5 seconds, to keep that Major Breach debuff active. Next up, we've got our front bar heal called Living Trellis. This comes from the Green Balance skill line, which is our healing skill line. This is the third skill that you get in Green Balance. You get a nice heal every time you take damage. Every 1 second, you get that 2k. This does scale with your buffs to healing done, healing received. But the reason why I really like this in PvP is that second line there. When the vines expire, they heal you for 5,000 or more health. And so basically a little trick you can do here is you can cast the heal, has 10-second timer, and then you're getting that 1 heal per second while you're taking damage. But as soon as you recast it, you're gonna get that 5k heal to come in every time you recast it. So you can basically just spam this and you're getting the 5k heal while you're also getting the 2k heal from getting hit. So about 7k per second overall while you're casting this. You can also cast it while blocking, just to decrease the damage coming in and make sure you still get a nice bit of healing coming in as well. So that's kind of the trick for that, is don't just cast it once. If you're taking a lot of pressure, block and just multiple cast this guy. All right, after Living Trellis, we have next Force Pulse, which does, like I mentioned earlier, flame, frost, and shock damage. This is why having a high spell damage is going to be helpful on this build. So this comes from the Destruction Staff skill line. It's the first skill you get. Just morph this to Force Pulse. And you may be curious as to why I'm not using the Interrupt version, especially since this is a PvP build. Well, if we read the second part of the skill here, up to 2 nearby enemies will take 3k magic damage if they were already inflicted with burning, chilled, or concussed. Now, since we are putting out a lot of frost damage, especially on our back bar, we're going to have a very high uptime on chilled, on the chilled debuff. And so that means if your nearby enemies are hit with chilled, they're going to get damage from Force Pulse too. So this effectively becomes another AoE instant cast spammable. So not only do we have, our Fissure doing AoE damage, but most of the time, Force Pulse is also going to be doing AoE splash damage. So it really just goes well with the overall theme of this build and the direction that we're taking, which is just a lot of AoE pressure damage. Next up, we've got Inner Light. This comes from the Mages Guild skill line. Really nice ability that I use on tons of builds, mostly for that 5% max Magicka and the Major Prophecy buff. This gives us 10% spell critical, which on a heavy armor build is key. You especially want that 10% spell critical. Now you also get a reveal for stealth enemies if you pop that ability, so that's also nice. And then you can benefit from some other passives here. I don't have them yet, but Magicka Controller, you can basically get 2% extra max Magicka and Magicka Recovery just for having that ability slotted, so that's really nice. And then for our ultimate here, Northern Storm, probably no surprise here. This is definitely a very strong ability. Now, it is getting reduced a little bit in the next patch, but only the snare is getting reduced. I believe it's coming down to 30 or 40% from 70. They're not touching the damage or the major protection or the max Magicka. You just get so many buffs from this ultimate, you guys. There's no reason not to run this front bar on a Magicka Warden. 8% max Magicka. You can stack that potentially with 7% from Inner Light, giving you 15% extra max Magicka on a Warden. That's crazy. Plus the major protection here for 8 seconds. 8 seconds of major protection. So not only are we doing tons of AoE damage, snares, but we're also making ourselves and our allies protected there by 30%. It is just amazing. It makes the Magicka Warden what it is. So let's switch over to our back bar, which is our Ice Staff. And we've got Winter's Revenge. Winter's Revenge comes from Winter's Embrace. Second ability you unlock here. And this is basically the Magicka morph of the skill. So this does a lot of good AoE damage pressure. It's going to be over 2k there. It also does a nice snare, 30% movement speed. And the other really nice thing about this morph is you can cast this, check out the range, at max range. So something that I like to do, let's say that the enemy team is over on that other side of the river. They're coming straight at us. I'll just drop this down in front of them and just kind of snare them in place before they can even get to my group. Also, if somebody's trying to get away, like let's say Nightblade's trying to go around this corner, I can put the Frost AoE well in front of me, basically wherever I need it to help control the area. So not only does it do really good damage here, but also that control and that snare is really important to the overall play style of Magicka Warden. So going along with Winter's Revenge, we also have Blockade of Frost. So even more frost damage, AoE potential. It does about the same damage. Does a snare as well. And you have that chance for Immobilize. So that's that root that we talked about. Having enemies in this area gives a chance of having them snared and rooted, making that control gameplay even easier. Now this is cast out from your character, so it's not a range, but it does go pretty far. So you'll just basically stack both of these on top of each other for just maximum AoE frost damage. All right, next up is Enchanted Growth, and I feel like it's really important to have not just a front bar heal where we have Living Trellis, but also to have a back bar heal. So no matter what bar you are on, you can get some health back. So this comes from our Green Balance skill line. First skill you unlock, definitely do Enchanted Growth because this is the Magicka morph. Gives us some nice buffs here, Minor Intellect and Minor Endurance, so we get an extra 10% Magicka and Stamina recovery. You can also cast this on your group members. So let's say my group's running out ahead of me. I can just pop this. Everybody in front of me now has 10% Magicka and Stamina recovery. So that buff is really nice. Obviously it heals out in front of you as well, kind of like a field. So you can heal multiple allies as well. If you're taking pressure on your back bar, definitely make sure you block. Again, with your Ice Staff, you'll actually get a little bit of reduced damage. You have more damage mitigation with an Ice Staff, so that is good. And then just cast that heal a couple times. It is a lot more expensive than Living Trellis though, so just keep that in mind. All right, and then we just have our two buffs here. Blue Betty, this comes from Animal Companions. Second to last ability that you get here. Gives you a nice bit of Magicka recovery. Major sorcery, increasing your spell damage by 20%. Keep in mind your Magicka recovery here, it does not show up on your stat sheet. It's just a flat amount of recovery. So this is really nice for heavy armor builds, you guys. This Netch ability is pretty much what makes heavy armor really easy to run on a Warden. Doesn't matter if you're Magicka build or Stamina build. Heavy armor on a Warden is like perfect because you have this sustain that you don't have to worry so much about, running medium or light armor for sustain. And not only that, with our Blue Betty version, we can remove one negative effect. You can just cast this over and over again to remove effects. And the nice thing about casting this is it's free, and it also gives you a little bit of a heal. When we talk about our passives, one of our Animal Companion passives gives us healing back every time one of our Animal Companions is summoned. So then we just got Ice Fortress. This comes from Winter's Embrace. First ability you unlock, make sure you choose the Ice Fortress morph because minor protection is huge. That 8% damage reduction might not sound like a lot, but it just feels like so much when you're in PvP. It's what makes Magicka Wardens really tanky overall, so make sure you are using this morph. And then for our ultimate here, you can do different things, but just an easy choice is going to be Healing Thicket, which is the green balance ultimate. Gives you a pretty strong heal over time, almost like an emergency heal because the cost is still pretty low, 90 ultimate there. I do prefer this morph because we get 6 seconds, and then this morph provides an extra 4 seconds of healing, so about 10 seconds overall. All right, so that covers our active skills. Let's talk about passives really quickly here. Wardens have some of the best passives in the game, so it's really important that you grab these. Under Animal Companions, we talked about Bond with Nature. That's that little mini heal that you get where you can spam your Netch and get healed. Savage Beast is also great. You basically get 4 ultimate every 8 seconds. Then Flourish, this one is interesting. You get Magicka and Stamina Recovery 12% if an Animal Companion ability is slotted. So make sure you have this double barred, meaning you want at least 1 Animal Companion on your front bar. I've got 2 here. And then 1 on the back bar. Usually you'll have your Blue Betty here. So just make sure you have 1 on each bar. And you're good for that extra 12% recovery, which is really nice. And then Advanced Species, we actually get 6% for this on this build. So it's 3% per ability slotted. And we have our Bird of Prey and Deep Fissure for that. Under Green Balance, this is our healing skill line. You want all of these as well. Accelerated Growth is really good when you're under pressure because it gives you access to Major Mending, which is 25% extra healing. Nature's Gift just gives us some good Magicka and Stamina Sustain, whichever's lower. Emerald Moss, not so great, just gives you extra healing done. But then Maturation is a great passive here because you get access to Minor Toughness, which is an extra 10% health bonus. And that's every time you activate a heal. Now you may think, well, what if I'm not taking damage, I'm not healing, I'm not getting that buff? Well, actually, it really works out great because your both your Blue Betty and your Shocks here have access to that healing under Animal Companions. So you can see I got that buff right there just for activating Shocks, or if I just spam Blue Betty gets that Minor Toughness buff as well, because we're getting that healing bonus from Bond with Nature is actually able to proc Minor Toughness through the Maturation passive. So I don't know if that's intentional or not, but it's really helpful. I'm glad that it ended up that way. Winter's Embrace, you will want to grab all of these, primarily defensive passives. This, though, is great. So it gives you a 200% extra chance to apply Chilled. And we talked about how important Chilled is. Not only is that going to help with immobilizing targets, it's also going to give you that AoE burst damage from Force Pulse, having your enemies chilled. So this ability makes Force Pulse really strong to run on Magicka Warden, you guys. Definitely check that out. It's worth it. And then under weapon skills, it's really easy. All you need is Destruction Staff passives. So light armor, you'll want to grab just the first 3 here because you can have, the 2 light armor pieces active and get some decent passives here. Definitely want to pick up all your heavy armor passives here. This is where the money is because heavy armor is all about survivability. You can see we get an extra almost 2k physical and spell resistance. We get health recovery, not such a big deal, but we get that extra Magicka and Stamina when we take damage every 4 seconds. 10% max health is awesome on top of Minor Toughness. Got lots of health on this build, which is great. Increased Resource Restore on heavy attacks, awesome. And then healing received by 8% is going to help you stay alive. Vampire is optional. I do like it for supernatural recovery. 10% there. Also, the Undeath passive actually does work quite well on this. You reduce the damage you take by 33% while you're below 50% health. Mage's Guild, not a priority, but if you have the time or if you already have it unlocked, definitely get those. Especially Magicka Controller, you'll get an extra 2% max Magicka and Magicka Recovery there. Undaunted, if you can get up to 9 there, that's what you want. Under Assault, very important to have Combat Frenzy. This gives you 10 ultimate on the first rank, 20 ultimate at second rank when you kill an enemy player. That's huge for getting your Northern Storm back as soon as possible. Obviously, unlock all your racial skills. And then Alchemy Medicinal Use, you must have this passive unlocked for the extra potion duration And really quickly, let's just check out those champion points if you're interested. I do play this mostly in Battlegrounds. Magicka Wardens are so strong in Battlegrounds, you guys. If you've never played a BG and you have a Magicka Warden, definitely check it out. It's really fun. But if you're more into CP campaigns, then here's what I would recommend. 37 Warlord, 29 Sprinter, 43 into Tenacity. Lots of heavy attacks on this build, you guys. Don't miss those. 75 into Arcanist, 43 Mooncalf, 20 into Shadow Ward, 23 Tumbling. Over in the blue tree, 27 Blessed, 23 Elfborn, 56 into Elemental Expert, 41 into Spell Erosion, 16 Staff Expert, 56 Master at Arms, 51 into Thaumaturge. Lots of damage over time on this build for sure. 51 Ironclad, 10 Spell Shield, 56 into Resistant, 43 into Hardy and Elemental Defender, 34 into Thick-Skinned, 23 Quick Recovery, and 10 Heavy Armor Focus. All right, everybody, that's going to wrap it up for this easy Magicka Warden PvP build. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, if you did, make sure you drop a like down below. Leave a comment as well. It really helps me out. It helps the channel get noticed on YouTube, which I always appreciate. I've got some PvP gameplay that I want to just include here at the end so you can see more about how the build plays. Overall, like I said, just a really fun and easy to put together build. So definitely check that footage out if you're curious. And until then, I'll see you guys around in the next video. Thanks.
There is still more fighting to be done.